The day I found out, I was eating leftover rice at my kitchen counter at 7:14 in the morning, still in the oversized gray hoodie I'd slept in, scrolling through nothing on my phone the way you do when your brain hasn't fully loaded yet. My screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize at first. Columbus area code, but not one saved in my contacts. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'm glad I didn't. Maya. The voice was thin, scratched at the edges, but I knew it immediately. It was my grandmother, and she was crying before she finished saying my name. She told me she was calling from the hospital. Room 114, St. Anne's, the hospice wing on the 3rd floor. She told me she'd been there for 11 days and that my parents had asked her not to contact me yet. She said she'd listened to them for as long as she could stand to. She said she was sorry. She kept saying that, "I'm so sorry, baby, I'm so sorry." And I kept telling her it was okay, that whatever it was okay, because what else do you say to a 78-year-old woman crying from a hospice bed at 7 in the morning? Then she told me about the money. And then she told me she'd already called someone else before she called me. Her attorney. I set down my fork. The rice went cold. And something in me, something that had been quietly patient for a very long time, went completely still. That stillness wasn't grief. I want to be clear about that. It was recognition. My name is Maya Okonkwo. I was 29 years old when this happened. I'm 31 now, and I'm telling this story from a one-bedroom apartment I chose entirely by myself, with a lease that has only my name on it, in a building where nobody has a key but me. I work as a financial compliance analyst for a logistics company in Columbus, Ohio. What that means in plain language is that I spend my days reading contracts, flagging irregularities, and making sure that money moves where it's supposed to move and not an inch further. I am, professionally speaking, the person you call when you think something doesn't add up. The irony of what my family did is not lost on me. My grandfather, my mother's father, Emmanuel Adeyemi, died in March of the year before all this happened. He was 81. He had a mild stroke in January, came home from the hospital, seemed to be stabilizing, and then one quiet Tuesday morning he didn't wake up. My aunt found him at 9 a.m. when she came to bring him his blood pressure medication. He looked, she said, completely peaceful, like he'd simply decided he was done. I loved that man in the specific, unhurried way you love someone who never made you feel like you had to earn it. He taught me things. Not life lessons in the poster-quote sense. Real things. How to read an amortization schedule. How to spot a bad contract clause. How to keep a ledger by hand even when software could do it faster because, he said, your hands knowing what your money is doing matters. He was an accountant for 34 years. He retired at 67 and spent the rest of his life tending a garden, watching Nigerian dramas, and drinking his tea at exactly 4 p.m. every single day. When he died, he left behind a house, a modest savings account, some personal items, and a will he'd written with his attorney in 2019. Quietly, carefully, the way he did everything. In that will, he left me $23,400. Not a fortune. I want to be honest about that. I was not expecting to be made rich by my grandfather's passing. I wasn't sitting around calculating it. But $23,400 was specific. It wasn't a rounded number. It wasn't an afterthought. It was the exact balance of a CD account he'd been growing since 2011. The year I graduated high school, and he told me, I started this for you the day you got your diploma. Don't touch it until you need it for something real. I didn't even know the account still existed. I found out about it when the will was read. And then, for 8 months after the will was read, nothing happened. No check. No transfer. No phone call from my parents, who had been named as informal administrators of the estate alongside my grandmother, explaining any kind of delay. I asked once, in September, gently, over Sunday dinner. My mother said the estate was still being sorted out. My father nodded and changed the subject to my sister's new job. I didn't push. That was the thing about my family. Pushing always cost more than waiting. I'd learned that young. So I waited. What I didn't know was that while I was waiting, the decision had already been made. The money was already gone. And it had been gone since July. Let me tell you something about being the capable one in a family that mistakes capability for endurance. From the outside, my family looked like a lot of Nigerian-American households in Columbus. My parents had been married for 32 years. My father, Charles Okonkwo, worked in hospital administration. My mother, Grace, was a registered nurse for 22 years before she moved to part-time consulting. They owned a 4-bedroom house on Eastmore Drive. They went to church every Sunday. They sent money back to family in Lagos twice a year. By any visible measure, they were solid, respectable, hard-working people. And they were. In many ways, they genuinely were. But inside that house, there was a current running that nobody named out loud. And that current had a direction. It always flowed toward my sister. Her name is Tola. She's 25 now. 4 years younger than me. And I want to be careful here because this story is not about hating my sister. Tola didn't design the dynamic she was born into any more than I did. But she benefited from it, consistently and significantly. And she was old enough to notice and young enough to simply accept it as the natural order of things. The favoritism started early. Small at first, the way these things always are. When I was 14, I wanted to attend a summer academic program at Ohio State. A 2-week science and mathematics enrichment course that cost $340 to enroll. I had researched it myself, printed the application, highlighted the deadline. My father looked at the paper, set it on the counter, and said we'd see. We never saw. The $340 never materialized. I didn't go. 2 years later, when Tola was 12, she decided she wanted to take private violin lessons. She had expressed this interest exactly once at dinner, the way children announce things. Casually, almost experimentally. By the following Saturday, she had an instructor. The lessons were $65 a week. They continued for 3 years. I'm not telling you this to sound bitter about violin lessons. I'm telling you because $65 a week for 3 years is over $10,000. And nobody in that house ever once suggested that $340 for an academic program was in the same conversation as something my parents couldn't afford. It was never about money. It was about who they pictured when they thought about giving. When I graduated from Ohio State with a degree in finance, first in our immediate family to finish a 4-year degree, my parents took us to dinner at Applebee's. I'm not exaggerating. Applebee's. We ordered the 2 for $20 deal, and my father gave a toast that was genuinely warm and loving, and I smiled and meant it, because I understood by then that this was the register my accomplishments lived in for them. Warm. Moderate. Appropriate. When Tola graduated from a 2-year cosmetology program 3 years later, my parents rented out a banquet room at a Nigerian restaurant in Westerville. 47 people attended. There was a DJ. My mother wore osso oak. My father gave a speech that lasted 11 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock on the wall behind him, not out of resentment, but because I was genuinely curious how long it would go. Well, I told myself these were just different expressions of love. Different seasons. Had a good job. I was building my life. I didn't need a DJ. But then there was the apartment situation. When I moved out at 23, I moved out entirely on my own. First and last month's rent, security deposit, used furniture from Facebook Marketplace, a mattress I carried up 3 flights of stairs with a coworker named Danielle who I still owe a very large favor. My parents helped me load the moving truck. They bought me a set of towels from Target. That was the full extent of the financial assistance. When Tola moved out at 22, my parents co-signed her lease on a 2-bedroom apartment in Gahanna, covered her security deposit of $1,800, furnished her living room, and paid her first 3 months of utilities while she got settled. I found this out not from my parents but from Tola herself, mentioned offhandedly during a phone call, the way you mention something that isn't a secret because it never occurred to you it should be. I remember sitting in my car in a parking garage after that call, engine running, just sitting. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry exactly. It was more like something confirmed itself. A suspicion I had been too generous to fully believe finally looked me in the eye and said, "Yes, this is exactly what you thought it was." And I made myself a quiet deal in that parking garage. I would not shrink. I would not beg. I would not perform gratitude for scraps while watching someone else get the meal. I would simply keep building, quietly, carefully, the way my grandfather taught me, And I would wait for the moment when the gap between who they thought I was and who I actually was became impossible to ignore. I didn't know then that the moment was already being built for me. I didn't know my grandfather had been building it for years. And I didn't know that the thing that would finally crack everything open was not an argument, not a confrontation, not a long overdue conversation at the kitchen table. It was a car. A brand new, pearl white 2023 Honda CR-V sitting in my parents' driveway on a Saturday afternoon in November, with a red bow on the hood. I wasn't supposed to be there that Saturday. I had stopped by my parents' house on November 12th to drop off a birthday card and a small gift for my father. His birthday was the following Tuesday, and I wouldn't be able to come by then because I had an early morning audit presentation on Wednesday that I'd been preparing for all week. I wasn't staying long. I had my coat on when I rang the doorbell. I was planning to be there maybe 20 minutes. My mother answered the door, and something crossed her face when she saw me. It was fast, less than a second, but I've spent my whole life reading that face, and what I saw was not surprise. It was a very specific, very controlled version of not now. She smiled immediately after and said, "Maya, come in, come in." I stepped inside and that's when I heard it through the back windows. Voices in the driveway. Laughter. My father's big, rolling laugh that he only uses when he's genuinely proud of something. I looked through the kitchen window and I saw them all gathered in the driveway. My father. My Aunt Beezy. Two of my parents' church friends whose names I always mixed up. My sister Tola, standing with both hands pressed over her mouth, shoulders shaking the way they do when she's overwhelmed with happiness. And the car. Pearl white. Brand new. A 2023 Honda CR-V with a red satin bow on the hood so large it looked like something from a television commercial. The kind of bow you order specifically because you want the moment to look like a moment. I stood at the kitchen window for a few seconds longer than I should have. Then I went outside. My father saw me first. Again that flash. That same controlled micro-expression my mother had shown at the door. Then his smile widened and he opened his arms and said, "Maya, you're here, good. Come and celebrate your sister." I hugged him. I hugged my mother. I smiled at Tola, who hugged me and said, "Can you believe it? Can you believe it?" And she was so genuinely happy, so completely lit up, that for a moment I just stood in it with her. Because she's still my sister. Whatever else is true, she is still my sister. But then my Aunt Beezy, my mother's older sister, a woman who has never once in my memory said a quiet thing when a loud one was available, looked at me with that particular smile she reserves for moments she finds entertaining and said, "You know, Maya, your parents said this is partly from your grandfather's money. From his estate. A gift for Tola to start her new chapter." The driveway went quiet in my head. Not around me. Around me it was still laughter and admiration, and my father explaining the CR-V's fuel efficiency to the church friends. But inside my head, everything went completely, perfectly silent. I looked at my mother. She was looking at the car. I looked at my father. He was pointing at the sunroof. I said very calmly, "Dad." He turned. "Was this bought with the money Grandpa left me?" The silence that followed was maybe 3 seconds long. Felt like a season. My father's expression did something I'd never seen it do before. It didn't get defensive. Didn't get apologetic. It arranged itself into something almost bureaucratic. The face of a man who had already decided on the answer long before the question was ever asked. "We made a family decision," he said. "Your grandfather would have wanted to support Tola's new chapter. She needed reliable transportation. The estate funds were available and we used them appropriately. We used them appropriately." I repeated that in my head once. Then again. "That money was left to me specifically," I said. My voice was level. "I want you to understand. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not give them the version of me that was easy to dismiss. It was in Grandpa's will. It had my name on it." My mother turned then. And what she said, I have thought about it almost every day since. "Maya, you have a good job. You're stable. Tola needed this more than you did. Your grandfather loved all of us. He would have understood." There it was. Not "we're sorry." Not "we should have talked to you." Not even the dignity of an excuse that tried to hold together. Just "you're stable." She needed it more. As if my grandfather's explicit, legally documented, named and notarized final wish for me was simply a suggestion that my parents had the authority to override because they had decided, in their private calculation, that I was fine enough to be passed over. I nodded once. I said, "Okay." I hugged my father goodbye. I kissed my mother on the cheek. I waved at Tola and told her the car was beautiful because it was. And I drove home in my own car. A 2019 Civic I had bought and paid for myself, and I called no one, said nothing, and sat with what I now knew. I had been passed over. The question was no longer whether it had happened. The question was what I was going to do about it. And the answer to that question was already waiting for me. It was sitting in a hospice room on the 3rd floor of St. Anne's, in the hands of a 78-year-old woman who had been watching her family for decades, and who had, it turned out, been quietly preparing for exactly this moment. Here is what I knew about my grandmother, Mama Adeyemi, before that phone call changed everything. I knew she was sharper than she let people believe. I knew she had been married to an accountant for 51 years and had absorbed, through pure proximity and attention, more about how money and paperwork actually worked than most people who had never studied either. I knew she had opinions she kept folded inside polite silence, the way you keep a good knife in a cloth. Not because the knife was dull, but because she understood that the right moment for it had not yet arrived. And I knew she had loved my grandfather with the specific, unsentimental devotion of someone who had built an entire life alongside another person and understood, bone deep, what that person's wishes actually meant. When she called me from room 114 that morning, she had already been in St. Anne's hospice for 11 days. Congestive heart failure. The same quiet, accumulating kind that takes its time. Her doctors had told my parents in late October. My parents had told me, and I need you to sit with this, they had told me exactly nothing. For 11 days, my grandmother had been in a hospice facility 20 minutes from my apartment, and my parents had made a deliberate decision to keep that from me. She told me this herself on the phone, in a voice that was thin but absolutely precise. "They said they didn't want you upset while you were busy with work," she said. "I told your mother that was not her decision to make. We disagreed. I waited as long as I could stand to wait. She had asked a nurse to dial for her. Her hands were giving her trouble. She told me about the money, calmly, methodically, the way she did everything. She told me that she had been present when my grandfather's will was read. She told me she had watched the estate sit unresolved for months and had asked my mother twice, in June and again in August, when Maya's portion would be transferred. She had been told both times that it was being handled, and in July, she found out it had been handled. Just not in the direction anyone had promised. She had confronted my mother directly. My mother had given her the same speech she would later give me in the driveway. "Maya is stable, Tola needed it, Emmanuel would have understood." My grandmother had said nothing in response. She had gone home. She had called her attorney the following morning. His name was Gerald Whitmore. He had managed my grandparents' legal affairs since 1997. This is the part where I need you to understand something about my grandfather's will. The $23,400 was mine. It was named, itemized, and assigned to me by name in a legally executed document. But that was not the only document Gerald Whitmore had in his files. My grandfather, in his methodical accountant's way, had also created what Gerald would later describe to me as a letter of instruction. A supplementary document, not a will itself, but a detailed written directive outlining his specific wishes for how his estate should be handled and by whom. In that letter, he had noted his concerns, written in 2021, 2 years before he died, about the family's financial dynamics. He didn't name anyone unkindly. He simply wrote in plain language that he wanted Maya's portion transferred directly to Maya, handled by Gerald Whitmore, and not routed through any family member as intermediary. He had seen it coming. My grandfather, who sat with me every February doing his taxes, who taught me how to read an amortization schedule, who started a CD account the year I graduated high school. He had seen the current in that family, and he had quietly, carefully, built a structure around it. The only problem was that my parents had been named as informal estate administrators, a role that, under Ohio probate law, carries real authority in the absence of a formal executor. Gerald had not been given direct transfer authority. He had advised my grandfather to make the designation more explicit in the will itself, and my grandfather, trusting perhaps that family would be family, had said he didn't think it would come to that. It had come to that. But here is what my grandmother understood, and what she had already set in motion before she ever dialed my number that morning. Gerald Whitmore had the letter of instruction. He had the original will. He had the CD account records dating back to 2011 with my name noted in the accompanying paperwork as the intended beneficiary. And he had something else, something my parents did not know existed. My grandmother had kept records. Every conversation about the estate, every date, every promise made and not kept, written in a small green notebook she kept in her nightstand, in the careful looping handwriting of a woman who had spent 51 years watching how her husband documented things and had quietly decided to do the same. Gerald Whitmore had a copy of that notebook. My grandmother had mailed it to him in September. Certified mail. Signature required. She told me all of this in room 114 in that thin, precise voice, while I stood in my kitchen in my gray hoodie at 7 in the morning, no longer eating, no longer breathing quite normally, with the absolute clarity of someone watching a picture come fully into focus for the first time. "I called Gerald this morning before I called you," she said. "He's expecting your call. He has everything he needs. I just wanted you to hear it from me first." A pause. I could hear the monitor in the room behind her voice. "Your grandfather chose you specifically, Maya. That was not an accident and it was not optional. Don't let them tell you it was optional." I told her I loved her. I told her I would call Gerald that morning. I told her I was coming to see her that afternoon, and I did. I was there by 1 p.m. with her favorite biscuits from a Nigerian bakery on Morse Road, and I sat with her for 3 hours and we talked about my grandfather and her garden and almost nothing about the money at all. But when I got back to my car that evening, I called Gerald Whitmore. And the 31 days that followed were the most deliberate of my life. I want to be precise about what I did and didn't do during those 31 days. I did not call my parents. I did not send a single text message referencing the money, the car, the will, or anything Gerald and I were doing. I did not bring it up at Thanksgiving dinner. Yes, I went, I brought jollof rice, I smiled, I helped clear the table. Because the single most important thing Gerald had said to me in our first phone call was this: do not tip them off. Do not give them time to construct a story. Let the paperwork do the talking. I have never in my life been more grateful for professional advice. Here is what Gerald told me in that first call, on a Tuesday morning 11 days before Thanksgiving. Under Ohio probate law, when a will designates a specific bequest, a named amount to a named individual, that bequest cannot be legally redirected by an informal estate administrator without the named beneficiary's written consent. My parents had no such consent. They had not asked for it. They had not disclosed the transaction to me. They had taken $23,400 from a designated estate account and used it as a down payment and full purchase contribution toward a vehicle titled in my sister's name. That was not a family decision. That was misappropriation of estate funds. Gerald used that phrase carefully the first time. He said it the way lawyers say things they want you to understand without alarming you unnecessarily. Misappropriation of estate funds. He said there were civil remedies available. He said depending on how the bank records read, there could potentially be probate court involvement. He said the letter of instruction, while not legally binding in the same way as the will itself, established a documented record of intent that would be meaningful to a judge. He said, "Your parents made a significant procedural error. The question is how you'd like to address it." I asked him what my options were. He gave me 3. Option 1. A formal demand letter sent to my parents, outlining the misappropriation and demanding full restitution of $23,400 within 30 days, with legal action as the stated consequence of non-compliance. Option 2. A direct probate court filing, which would trigger a formal review of the estate administration, potentially expose my parents to court-ordered restitution plus legal fees, and create a public record. Option 3. A negotiated resolution. Gerald contacts my parents' attorney directly, presents the documentation, and offers a structured repayment agreement in exchange for avoiding court. I asked Gerald which one he recommended. He said, "Start with the demand letter. Give them the chance to do the right thing quietly. If they don't take it, the next step is already prepared." Said send it. While Gerald prepared the letter, I did my own work that I am a financial compliance analyst. I know how to build a paper trail. Over the following 2 weeks, I compiled everything I could document independently. The original will, which I had a copy of from the estate reading. Screenshots of the car's listing price, which I found through the dealership's website after Tola had posted a photo on Instagram tagging the location. A photograph of the car in my parents' driveway, taken the day I'd been there, on my phone, timestamped November 12th, with the bow still on the hood. Bank records I requested through Gerald showing the CD account disbursement date, July 18th. The date my mother had first told me the estate was still being sorted out, September at Sunday dinner. 11 weeks after the money was already spent. I also wrote my own timeline. 3 pages, single-spaced, dated and sourced. Every conversation, every non-answer, every Sunday dinner, every time I had asked and been redirected. Gerald received the demand letter back from my parents' side. They had, upon receiving it, immediately contacted a family attorney of their own. On day 19, the response was not an apology. It was a counter-argument. Their attorney wrote that my parents had acted within their role as informal estate administrators. That the purchase of the vehicle was a good-faith family decision made in the spirit of the decedent's wishes. That my grandfather, and I want you to feel how breathtaking this was, would have approved of the use of funds to support a family member in need. They used my grandfather's name to justify taking what my grandfather had left specifically to me. I read that letter twice. I forwarded it to Gerald. Then I sent him one message. File with the court. Gerald filed the probate court petition on day 24. It named my parents by their full legal names. It cited the specific Ohio Revised Code sections governing estate administration and fiduciary duty. It attached the will, the letter of instruction, the CD account records, my grandmother's green notebook. All of it. Organized, sourced, and submitted. On day 29 my father called me. I did not answer. On day 30 my mother called. Then again 2 hours later. Then my Aunt Beezy called, which told me the entire extended family had now been informed and mobilized. Because my Aunt Beezy is the family's early warning system, and her involvement meant the situation had escaped containment. I did not answer any of them. On day 31 Gerald called me. He said, "They want to settle." The settlement meeting happened on a Wednesday afternoon in Gerald Whitmore's office on Broad Street. A quiet, carpeted room with dark wood furniture and a window that looked out onto a gray December street. I wore a black blazer and flat boots and I arrived 7 minutes early. My parents arrived with their attorney. My father was in his good coat, the charcoal one he wears to church. My mother had her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at the middle distance the way people do when they are managing their expression very carefully. Gerald read the terms. Full restitution of $23,400 to me. Transferred within 14 business days. An additional $3,100 in legal fees mine. Covered by my parents as part of the settlement. A signed acknowledgement that the estate funds had been disbursed without the named beneficiary's consent. Not an admission of criminal wrongdoing. Gerald had kept this civil. But a formal, signed witness statement that what happened had happened, and that it was not appropriate. And one more condition I had added myself. The vehicle, the pearl white 2023 Honda CR-V with the red bow, was not to be seized. I wasn't interested in taking a car from my sister, who had received a gift she had not known was stolen. But the vehicle's title, which had been registered in Tola's name using estate funds, was to be accompanied by a notarized letter, signed by my parents, explaining to Tola in full what those funds had been and where they had come from. I wanted her to know. Not to hurt her. But because she deserved the truth about what she was driving. My parents' attorney requested that condition be removed. I looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at me. I shook my head once. The condition stayed. My father signed first. He did not look at me while he signed. My mother signed second. When she finished, she looked up and her eyes met mine for a moment. Just a moment, and I don't know exactly what was in that look. Shame maybe. Grief of a particular kind. The specific grief of a parent who has been caught not by a stranger but by their own child, in a room full of paperwork in December. I didn't look away. I didn't perform anything. No coldness, no triumph, no tears. I just held her gaze until she looked back down at the papers. The $23,400 hit my account on December 19th. The additional $3,100 followed 2 days later. I transferred $5,000 of it immediately into a high-yield savings account I named privately in my banking app after my grandfather. I used another portion to finally take the trip I had been postponing for 2 years. 9 days in Portugal in February, solo, with a small journal and no agenda. The rest went into my investment account, growing the way he taught me money should grow. Quietly, patiently, without needing anyone's permission. My grandmother passed away on January 7th. I was there. I had been there the evening before, sitting with her, holding her hand while she slept. She had squeezed my fingers at one point without waking up, and I chose to believe she knew I was there. I don't know what my relationship with my parents is now. It is not what it was, but I'm not sure what it was ever deserved to be called a relationship in the full sense of the word. We speak occasionally. We are careful with each other in the way people are careful when they know the floor between them is different than it used to be. Tola called me in January, a week after our grandmother's funeral. She had received the letter. She was quiet on the phone for a long time and then she said, "I didn't know, Maya. I swear I didn't know." I told her I believed her. 'Cause I did. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was more than okay. And I meant it. Not in the way you say things to end a conversation, but in the real way, the way that lives in your chest and doesn't require any performance to maintain. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me. Have you ever been the stable one that your family quietly passed over? The one who was fine enough to be forgotten? 'Cause I see you. And I want you to know that being capable was never the problem. Being taken for granted was never your fault. If this story helped even one person feel less alone in what their family put them through, or gave someone the language for something they've been carrying without a name, then it was worth every word. Subscribe if you're new here. Share this with someone who needs it. And if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to know you best, I hope you remember that was never the truth about you.